Good evening, all. I'm Harini, the coordinator and compere of this evening's 8th edition of In Tandem. Today's theme is Exile. I would like to address our chairperson for this evening's symphonium is Dr. Archana Sardana, Associate Professor and Head Department of English, Adarsh College for Women, Chennai. We are delighted to introduce Dr. Archana Sardana, Head Department of English, Adarsh College for Women. She has put in solid service in teaching for 3 decades. She was awarded for the excellence by the University Teachers Association for tremendous contribution in the field of education. She has guided innumerable MPhil and PhD scholars. She has presented and published many papers in national and international level conferences. She is a most appropriate person to play the role of chairperson for this symposium. We are so privileged to have you, madam. I now request our chairperson, Dr. Archana Sardana, to make opening remarks about the theme of today's symposium. You can proceed, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Bharti, for your very kind words. And I must first and foremost thank my very good friend, Dr. Preeti Maria, and the department for inviting me to be the chairperson on such an important and interesting topic in the 21st century, wherein we are looking at the overlapping of post-coloniality, exile, transnationalism, transculturalism, and things of such might which rule our lives. I'm grateful for this opportunity. But Harini, I'd like to make a slight alteration. Should we go ahead with the paper presenters first and then I talk on the topic? How do you want me to go about this?
Your wish, ma'am.
Yeah. So shall we go ahead and listen to the speakers first?
Yes, ma'am, sure.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much. Coming to Queen Mary's College is always something very fascinating for me. I not only have a great friendship in your head of the department, I have other friends here also. So I'm thankful to all of you for giving me this opportunity. Let's make the best of today's evening. And I call upon the first presenter, Dr. Sumathi, to kindly present a paper. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. I'm here. I'm Dr. Sumathi here to present on the theme Exile and Diasporic Experience in Abdul Razak Gurnah's select novels. And Abdul Razak Gurnah, we all know that recently he has been awarded the Nobel Prize. Yes. So he is a Tanzanian writer. He is a novelist living in Britain, and uh, his personal experience of diasporic experience is expressed in his novel. Um, and here I have selected a novel, Admiring Silence. Admiring Silence, as the name suggests, that it deals with the silence of the ruled by the rulers. And he was shortlisted for Booker Prize for his novel Paradise and By the Sea in 2001. He is a retired professor teaching literature at University of Kent, and he actually presents the protagonist in perspective of the trauma that individual undergoes in silencing himself in political, social, and economic context against the oppression of colonizers and the political situation in Zanzibar. The Zanzibar is a land of ethnic group of people, and his migrancy even in England and the political situation in Zanzibar. He was unable to associate himself with either with Zanzibar or with England, and this kind of dilemma and the exile and diasporic experience is portrayed in this novel, admiring silences. And the narrator exhibits silence as a resistance against the discriminating attitude, racially, ethnically, as well as culturally. And the narration takes place in terms of exile and diasporic experience in relation to land, family, relationships as an immigrant character. The narrator, he silences himself in every situation. It doesn't mean that he is resisting, he is trying to become he is not subjugating himself towards the colonizers, but he is actually silencing himself to portray his resistance through the language that is used in the novel. And silence is the code of meaning, which conveys more meaning than something which is conveyed in a conversation. And silencing the voices of the characters due to alienation and migrant experience in the novel. And silence is a way through which migrants navigate the connection between the present and the past lives. The narratorial mode focuses on multiple dimensions to contribute the switch from present to past, attributing more to the migrant experiences in the novel. Silencing the very experience of alienation and exile paradoxically voices the experience which landscape and mindscape reflect in. The degree of silence reaches the pinnacle of voices in characters. And Abdul Razak Gurnah, in his admiring silence, engages the readers with the idea of diaspora and the academic conversation it revolves around. The novel crosses the boundary of African diaspora and the inhabitants, and the location of Black Atlantic as the central focus on African diaspora. Gurnah's novel moves the locus to the eastward diaspora, the Indian Ocean diaspora, which including Africa itself and more specifically the Eastern African coast in this new map. And diaspora projected by Gurnah in his novel is a cultural condition and effect in itself. And Atlantic diaspora marked by unlike Atlantic diaspora marked by physical dislocation and dispersion of mainly African people to new geographical locations, the Eastern African coast is a vital part of the Indian Ocean diaspora. Africans spread throughout Asia, and Africa is a part of diasporic experience. And Africa in the novel, especially any African novel, if we take, the diasporic experience will be very rich. And this multiplicity, migrancy between societies and between countries enriches diasporic experience of the writers. Zanzibar, when we look at Zanzibar, Zanzibar is a land of variety of ethnic groups, which makes the issue of power and control to be interrelated with language. Language defines the ethnicity, the political power, the economic power, and the control over the land and the language means the silencing the entire community. And narrator is a victim of denial of self-expression in the novel as he is alienated in his own land, as well as he is unable to associate himself with England as well. And for our listeners' point of view, I'm just giving the gist of the novel, the story. Okay, and here there is an unnamed character, the narrator, and the narrator is actually he has shifted from Zanzibar to England, and he is living in England. And he, after 17 years, he just goes back to his own land, Zanzibar, where he was not able to associate himself with his own family members. There is a lack of there is a lack of communication between even the family members. If we try to analyze the characters, there is another character, Emma, uh, who's an English woman whom this unnamed narrator has married, and there is another child, 17-year-old daughter, Amelia. And this man, at the age of 42, he was not able to associate himself with his own family members and his parents living in Zanzibar. He was not able to communicate with them, and the communication that he makes, it depends on how the others, how the listener is. So he is very creative in spinning stories according to the listener. So there is a block, there is a mental block in the communication between the family members and this unnamed narrator. And so when he goes back to Zanzibar, he was not able to associate with his land as well as with his family members. And when he comes back again to England, there is a break in relationship with this woman, Emma, as well. And this is due to, when I was reading this novel, I could consider this is due to entirely the alienation and exile, the effect of exile and alienation, that he was unable to maintain proper relationship with the people, especially with his family members. And and let me continue with the research paper. um, so the narrator is the victim of denial of self-expression in the novel, and he is alienated in his own land, as well as he is unable to associate himself with England as well. And when we take Hasem, he has commented on suppression. The suppression of subordinate languages is an act, a symbolic act that it denotes to silencing by those who have the control of speech in hand. And epigraph by Gurnah clearly in this novel states that he is a lover of silence, like all tyrants who control and silence. Admiring silence alludes to those who use their power to silence people subject to their will. In Admiring Silences, unnamed narrator is a refugee from a parasitic post-colonial political struggle in Zanzibar, a large island off the east coast of Africa and a semi-autonomous state of Tanzania. He lacks identity as he is unable to associate himself with Britain or Zanzibar. His peculiar style of narration lies in modifying the story of his life to suit the expectations of his listeners. Gurnah has employed a new narrative technique and exhibit his expertise in this mode. Narration switches from childhood memories to youth, commenting on the life from an adult perspective. There is an essence of autobiographical element that the protagonist is a writer and a literature teacher at a secondary school in England. So this makes us associate the narrator with Gurnah himself. So there is a little autobiographical element that we can find in here, and the alienation and that long silence is admiring and more meaningful, and creates a block mentally as well as physically between his home and his home in new normal. When he finds that he visits Zanzibar after 15 years since he left, and communication between the narrator and his family plays a vital role as he communicates only through letters, which makes him hide some details about his life in England, especially his marriage life. And analyzing the psychology of the narrator, he projects himself in whatever way he wants according to the listener. Frustration and exhaustion of the circumstances breaks these blocks that he has created in his circle, and lack of self identity leads to this kind of projection of his character, and the readers have to really search for his true identity in the novel. His pseudo life in England becomes a burden as time moves on. He made an attempt to break his silence and inform his family about his secretive relationship with Emma, an English woman, and, and their daughter Amelia, through his temporary visit. And silencing in this context, Stuart Sim, a critique, has clearly pointed out silencing as a condition and silencing as a response. And silencing as a condition emerges out of silencing itself emerges out of the condition due to experiences that have control over their lives and conditions where tyrannical regimes on Zanzibar society, as well as the problems that persist in the narrator's family. The narrator's failure in relationships is due to the silence that that blocks his mind as well as his relations. Introversion and remoteness, which made him maintain secrets in relationships, is the inherited quality of his father, Abbas. There is another character, Abbas, his father, who had left him and his mother and never heard of anything about him when his family was in Zanzibar. And Emma considers the silence of his father to be he had no dominion, I quote, he had no dominion over his life, and I unquote. The protagonist maintains the silence in most of his conversation with people around him and in his narration too. Silence can be defined in terms of resistance as a kind of response to be the effective tool as a defiance against people who treat him as other. Oppressor versus oppressed, and the relationship between them, especially the tyrants of Zanzibari government, is portrayed through the silence maintained by the narrator. The choice of silence is exhibited through the title Admiring Silence, and the novel rejoices silence. Gurnah calls the admirers of silence in reference to the oppressor who celebrates the silence of the oppressed in taking control over them, and in reference to the oppressed who is reluctant and refuses to enter into conversation with the one who treats him with discriminatory attitude. The notion of silence to be acceptance or submission is falsified in terms of reaction against racist ideology. The first person narration is confessional in style, but the truth about narrator's self knowledge about his own life lacks the central focus as he shifts the way of narration from one listener to the other. Silences are enveloped by narrator's stories he tells for himself and other characters, even to Emma's parents, Mr. Willoughby and Mrs. Willoughby. And the creative way in which he narrates the stories takes a new form of inventions that console him in time or in times of alienation. The stories that he twines are the uh, mimicking the discriminatory views of migrants in imperial structure. He often narrates the stories of ex-colonies and retellings of imperial adventure tales. One such tale is the tale of Pocahontas, who provides an insight into his life as a foreigner in England. The stories are closely related to his silences and can be discussed in connection with silence. The text is not so rich in stories to deduce further meanings, and the text plays a vital role as they fill the duration of space with ellipses, parallelipses, and analepsis and frequency, etc. Silence as a condition treated in the novel with the emergence of the result of social, racial, and familial complexities. Zanzibar society is ruled by oppressive regimes in the rim of Indian Ocean and at the crossroads of Oman Sultanate and of the Arabs, during which the power of politics and economy speak. In historical context, Nadrao Hazim He has commented, I quote, these policies centralize political authority under British colonial rule and cultivate economic elite. This political strategy of the British rule modified existing social relations, maximizing economic control and generating extracting the greatest amount of revenue for the crown. To this end, Britain promoted Zanzibar as an Arab state and Arabs the sole governing power, establishing Arabs as their political representatives was an easy choice for the British, as local Arabs were already wealthy from their transnational maritime trade routes and were the dominant economic ruling class. I unquote. The shift of power is projected through the colonial venture and the Omani government, again, making rich Indians the dominant economic class and powerful Arabs the dominant ruling class before colonization, uh, which clearly indicates the discrimination between the races, and there is no space in history for the rules. And in terms of Gurnah in the novel, Zanzibar, even after independence, faces the discrimination between the ruler and the ruled, and nothing has changed between them. And he comments that the country is still governed by I quote, homegrown bullies. I unquote, again I quote, the lawmakers and the bullshitters squatting over everyone's faces and issuing their waste on them, I unquote. Narrator criticizes the government and the ruling class to be broken sewer system of Zanzibar. The function of storytelling is not just limited to the whitewashing of unwanted memories, it also forms and functions according to the narrator's needs, and it gives to all the uh, blocks in his mind, mental blocks in his mind, uh, to come out or to overcome the problem of alienation and exile. And the stories can be grouped as inventions to present his life better than it is, with the aim of acceptance by the circle of Emma's English friends. And here, actually, among English friends, also he should be accepted. When he goes to Zanzibar, also he should be accepted. So, according to the listener, he just makes stories. He invents stories about his own life, and this is very symbolic of lack of self identity. The man is trying to, the narrator is trying to project himself in different ways, in different circumstances, in front of different listeners. That shows that he lacks the true identity. He was not able to show his true identity because he's not accepted as the one among them in the society. And here, this non-acceptance, he wants to just climb acceptance, so he just tells his own story. The narrator's telling stories derives from a wish to escape the burden of his past and predicament of his marginalization, since he believes stories can provide him with a way out of his troubles. I quote, there were stories in the first place, stories to fill the heart and the mind in the context with life, to lift the ordinary into metaphor, to make it seem that the time of my passing was a choice in my hands. And that is what stories can do. They can push the feeble disorders we live with without off sight. His stories become tools to fix the disorders in his life, to make his life bearable, and to control it in the face of experiences life has forced upon him. His disconnection from homeland and isolation as a result of migrancy. In addition to this, his concern to be accepted by Emma and the other people around him in England prompts him to invent stories about himself. All he wants is to be one of the English people around him without feeling estranged. I quote, I imagined that I looked as they did and talked as they did and had lived the same life that they had lived. And I had always been like this. I unquote. So here the narrator's feeling of estrangement, both in his homeland and his broken ties with Zanzibar and in England, is a feeling that he shares with exiles, which opens up the relationship between exile and migrancy for a discussion and helps us to explore where Gurnah's novel can be placed. And besides redefining exile and migrancy in opposition to each other, here we can see the mental trauma that the narrator undergoes here because of migrancy and the exile experience. And the narrator could not leave Zanzibar behind since his memories mostly belong there. And however, his past life does not give him comfort because of the familial and social turmoils which he escapes. And his visits to Zanzibar years later makes it clearer that he has already broken his ties with his family and homeland long before he leaves in England. And it has been very long since he settled in England and established a life with his partner Emma and their daughter Amelia. And on the other hand, he still cannot feel he's a part of the life in England because of the discrimination he is subjected to, which makes him feel isolated and marginalized. Thus, his movement between two identities with a sense of displacement and the lack of discomfort in the past makes this novel as a very good example of alienation and exile. I hereby conclude saying that this novel can be studied for psychological trauma, the psychology of the character in terms of exile and alienation. Thank you. Ma'am, please unmute.
Yeah, sorry.
Ma'am, your audio is muted.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. So, quickly, I'd like to sum up your presentation. I think your paper is an exemplary survey of Razak's novel. And you are trying to tell us that how silences can speak in the migrant people when they are exiled. So, to quote Tao, silence is the source of great strength, I think. And you have very beautifully pointed out the African diasporic sense of displacement and rootlessness. Exile is also shown to be identical. I like the use of the word self-annihilation by you, especially in the modern post-Marxist Brechtian sense of the word self-annihilation from a contemporary writer is a great idea to ponder and research into. So that was very beautifully brought out by you, especially in the post-Marxist and the Brechtian sense of the word self-annihilation. I also like the binary that you use of the narrator and the self. So that was also an interesting point of your paper. Now, coming to the use of the motive silence is also very interesting, because we have always read that how silences can communicate. And here, what the silence of the exiled people is communicating is their anxiety, the loss, and the fear. But you've also added a little positivity, a positive note to the silence of the narrator when you also say that he's looking at some kind of, consolation through this silence. So that matrix of silence of the human deed and the thought is also very beautifully portrayed by you. And silence can convey and it can also invoke. Interestingly, silence is considered to be the exact opposite of the uttered word. If you look at the opposite word, then probably silence is something that is exactly the opposite of the uttered word. And silence is also impaired articulation. But here, in this paper that you presented, you made it a very, very powerful motif of colonial, historical, and political estrangement. So it was really interesting listening to you. Thank you for that presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah. So can we have the next presenter, please?
Am I audible and visible, ma'am?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. My greetings to all the eminent personalities who have gathered here. And I would like to express my gratitude to Dr. Maria Preeti Srinivasan, ma'am, head of the Department of English Literature, Queen Maris College, and all my professors at MCC and Queen Maris for making me understand that academic writing too could be interesting and fascinatingly draw you into it. So long ago, I was watching this debate show in Tamil, which was focusing on the topic whether the movies, the cine industry, has benefited the audience. But it was taking place in Switzerland, organized by the Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora of Switzerland. And as one of the speakers was substantiating their point about cine industry profiting the people, he was quoting the lines from Maniratnam's Kannathil Muthamittai, the song by Vairamuthu, which goes like this: "Vidai kodu engal nade, கடல் நீரில் தெளிக்கும் வீடே, பனைமரக்காடே, பறவைகள் கூடே, மறுமுறை ஒரு முறை காண்போமா, உதட்டில் புன்னகை துளைத்தோம், வெறும் கூடுகள் மட்டும் ஏந்தி செல்கின்றோம்." And the one thing that fascinated me was I saw most of the audience shedding tears. And someone who has never thought about this, the word exile itself, was thinking, why are they feeling so melancholy about leaving a ghastly nation to a paradise on earth like Switzerland, which is full of civic respects and rights? They have come out in flying colors, and so why should they feel sorry about living a place like that? And then Dr. Preeti ma'am gave me the impetus to go and present a paper on exile literature. As I was working on this, I happened to stumble upon the reflections on exile by Edward Said, and he begins his essay this way, saying that the thought of exile itself is the compelled one and a terrible experience. Then I got this idea: unless one is forced to think about exile, no one will think about it, and unless one experiences it, no one will understand how turbulencing it is. Besides, I learned that now my presentation should not be something that reveals the pains involved in exile, because there are so many diasporic writers who have opened the veil regarding the tormentations which they have underwent. But I should speak from the shoes of the censurers who should be enlightened. So that is why I titled my paper "Bye to the Homeland." And then I understood that, again referring to Syed, no matter how glorious or triumphant exile could be, the results are always undermined by the sense of loss and living behind. And then I also understood that this is the era of mass migration with so many problems taking place around the world. So this forced me to think about what could cause exile. There are several reasons, but at present, one of the main reasons why currently we are seeing mass immigration from Afghanistan to other parts of the world, or the issue in Bangladesh caused by the birds of the same feather, religious totalitarianism on the one hand. Then this forced me to think that this is also a point which emerged from the ideal of utopianism. And this idea obviously oozes from that part of the mind which uh, which produces uh, which produces creativity and all the ideals and principles for which we stand. When we formulate one theory or one idea or one worship, and we think that that alone is the right thing, and we want everyone to follow it, so that we could create one code of conduct, so that we could make the world a fantasy land, we obviously need to force people who are against us. But when people come, there comes diversity. But if we don't want diversity and want everyone to be diverged into be converged into one particular point, we obviously need to use this authoritarian principle, which leads to dictatorship. And that is why this religious totalitarianism is acting as antagonist to democracy. And if I could take the liberty, just like Edward Said, who could use examples of envoys of nationalism who died of asphyxiation while they were smoking, lying on their bed, starting up a fire, of their cassettes of patriotic poets, I could use examples from movies like Vishwarupam by Kamal Sir. So this movie opened up new perspectives for me. So there's a scene where Kamal Hassan, who plays this raw agent, and his wife are being caught by the federal police, and they are mistaken and they are interrogated. So this police officer in America interrogates this Nirupama, who's an oncologist, and Nirupama says that she swears on God that everything she says is truth, and the police officer asks, which God? Allah? And she says, that's my husband's God. My God has 4 hands. Then the police officer asks, how would you crucify a God with 4 hands? And then she says, we don't crucify our God, we dunk him in the ocean. Exactly. There comes religious tolerance. The point is, yours is an Arabic version of divinity, mine is a Tamil version, the other one's a Sanskrit version, the other one's a Mesopotamian version, an English version, a Roman version, but they are all the ultimate spirit of divinity. They, unless he or she or it or they, the gods, stands for humanity and the codes of nature, it is no wrong in having our own principles or ideals or our own beliefs and practices on God. And again, coming back, so this made me to think that we need to develop a sort of tolerance. But when tolerance comes, that comes the question, where do nationalism stand? And then it made me think that, again, going back to several writers like Syed, we find that nationalism itself has come from people who have conceived great ideas because they have the past of bloodshed. And these people form an organization and a governance for their own. And when they start their own systems of democracy and republic, thinking, having in their mind the retrospection and ideas of beyond and progression, they form their conducts. But what happens is, when these nationalistic principles are highly inclusive, they forget the fact that there are other truths too. So when there comes this kind of inclusivity, we have our truths for ourselves, and we have methods to fend off others, and we have our own truths or our own versions for the stories of the others. But Edward Said too says that when it comes to America, for instance, the creativity or the academic excellence, the ideals about art and the present technologies America has today have partly come from the diasporic community who have immigrated to America. On that note, it is good to hold nationalism. At the same time, we also should know that we have to be pluralistic, so that giving space for others to be to let them be unique and original on their own beliefs and practice their own culture. And then when we move from this idea to the point when we have to speak about exiles themselves, we find that exiles, as Simone Weil says, they often deliberately use their right not to belong anywhere. They become highly patriotic. They become highly attached to their own culture, because they fight against the habitus, the amalgamation of habit and habitat. But what we have to focus is that the trauma they have underwent. When I was preparing for this, I went through so many texts, be it we are displaced by Malala Yousafzai. And the first part, I am displaced, she says that Kaswat Valley in Pakistan is called the Switzerland of Pakistan. And she says that when she was when she was flown to Britain for her surgery, she finds that the chillness in Pakistan is delightful, but the coldness which he experiences in Britain is biting and bitter. Now we understand that these migrants are exposed to a new geographical condition. They are deracinated from one soil and replanted in another soil, and they are asked to thrive. Now the problem here is belonging, identity crisis. When all these come, you don't have any idea where you should stand. But sometimes it is okay to go across than staying behind. But sometimes it is not good to stay. It is not good to cross over, because when you leave your legacy behind, you always feel the sense of loss. And again, going to the Sri Lankan Tamil writer now settled in Canada, R. Muthulingam, he has written many short stories, and on a psychoanalytical autobiographical note on his writing, we find that he always longs for his pitta and sambal of Sri Lanka. All these makes us understand that the turbulence they are going through is immense. But the solution which could be offered to them is that fresh perspectives. When they have the growth mindset, no matter wherever they are dispersed, they could be opening their eyes to see that whatever comes in their path, they could grow from it. And I could substantiate this with examples from classical literature, which has exile elements in it, be it William Shakespeare's As You Like It, where we have a Duke Senior who has been banished and usurped by his brother. And he, as soon as he is settled in the forest of Arden, he has this idea that everything around him is fine, because the cold winter, which digs its fangs in his flesh, constantly reminds him that it is far safer from the painted pomp and the envious coat. He also understands that the natural, unmade up experiences he feels are not flattery, but counsels which tell him that this is how the world will be, and he should constantly be moving to the next ideas. So then he has this idea that sweet are the uses of adversity, like a toad which looks ugly and venomous, was yet a precious jewel in its inside. And then he thinks that everything around him is valuable, as he says that he finds books in the running brook, sermons on stones, and tongues in trees, and good in everything. And then moving to Prospero from Tempest, he is also overthrown by his brother and forbidden from the kingdom. But as he goes to the island of Algiers, he uses that opportunity to pursue his passion, learning the arts of magic. And then he uses that opportunity to regain what has been denied to them and what he defied to do in the first place. Coming to all the overlapping of these ideas about religious totalitarianism, which leads to the erosion of human rights, or because religious totalitarianism itself comes from the idea of deterring the truth from the others, all the subaltern. So I wanted to reveal that exile could be hard, that people from outside could never experience or analyze how difficult it could be, because we are not the ones spurring on lava. And I wanted to make clear that my presentation could give some solution to the problems around, so that I thought the solution I could provide is exiles could have a growth mindset so that they can thrive wherever they are newly planted. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving a very holistic view of the exile. And what I really like, the way you started was very impressive, because you said that you were not wanting to speak about the traumatized trajectories of exile. All right. So, and coming from a youngster like you, I think it makes a lot of sense that when you really need to look at pain in a more dignified manner, where you accept it. So you also seem to have a very cheerful nature, and that could be a part of your being. That such a traumatized topic also, when we are drawn to so much of trauma, we use such words. You're looking at it, giving it not a very, very negative perspective, Senyavel. That I think is interesting and is brilliant. And we are living in a world which is so traumatized, and especially these days. So that was a very big and interesting highlight of your paper. And you are very interestingly also irresistibly drawn into, history, culture, religion, and regimes. So there is a good unification of all these done by you. Now, we all know that, yeah, quite true,
Thank you so
Dr.
much.
Rufus. Quite true. Now, we all know that literature has this very unique power, all right? You can condemn the powerful, and you can also critique the powerful, isn't it? So literature has that very interesting characteristic feature. And I think we as people who read, who teach, we should explore and exploit this unique characteristic feature of literature. I would also like to, I do not know if you have ever read this short story, Those Who Did Not Return to Omelas, Omelas. Okay, now quickly, I would just like to narrate this because you're talking of a totalitarian regime. I'd like to talk about this story. And this is a story which is done by Legwin. And she creates this kind of, they're all writers in the same stream as Atwood. But whereas Atwood is very happy calling herself to be a dystopian writer, Legwin is not for it. Okay, she's always telling people that these are all terms: dystopia, utopia, totalitarianism. These are all terms which are more used by the, the publishers. So there's a story, and you have a child who is chained, and otherwise Omelas is a very, very buzzing modern metropolis. But then there is this child who is here tied and is in chains. He is always in his own, he's in a very, very bad physical condition. He's in his own excreta. His skin has festered and all those things. But there is a catch there. If this child is freed, Omelas will lose its prosperity. Okay, so then, Legwin goes on to describe that this is a conflict. Since you spoke about the totalitarian governments, I think it will be interesting if you also look at this perspective of the story. And there are these people who will never return. So the parents themselves, they know that they need to help the child, but they're not willing to do it. So it is like that interesting, that very often quoted trolley incident, that if there is a trolley which is going on and there are two ways, and on one side you will kill 1,000 people and the other side there's only one. Most of the times what we do is we kind of look at the numbers and we will say, okay, we'll kill the 1,000 people and we not worry about the one. So this is that child who's that one. So I would also request you to read into it and look at some other interesting trajectories of looking at literature. So well done. Really, it was very nice and a good presentation. So
thank you so much.
Yeah,
it's an honor to speak with you as a chairperson. Because I've always loved the way you weave words.
Oh, no, thank you so much. I think now we very quickly sum up my understanding of exile literature and my point of view to it. I think exile is a part of human experience, and exile is both liberating and shocking. And this paradox is apparent because of our city of location where we are and where we go. So there is this touted tension between the place where the writer originally is supposed to be and where is he in exile. So there's always this kind of attention that exists between the country of your origin and the country of your exile. So thank you so much. Thanks, Preeti. Thank you. So there is a migrant worker. There is also the non-resident writer, and these days we also have the galvanitic writer. Okay, one day you are somewhere, as Sumathi's presentation also showed, that we see that Razak is a traveler. He's been here, there, everywhere. So these are these pastures of their travel that also attribute to what kind of writing they do. And we all know that how world literature has enriched because of the contribution from all these writers who live in exile and who speak about all these things. So exile as a theme, we consider it to be something that is, say 20th century, late 20th century, or even in the 21st century. But my contention is that exile as a theme has existed. Senyavel spoke about Shakespeare, but I like to delve a little deeper and look even at the scripture, where we see that how the Babylonians had thrown the Jews out. So the entire, and that famous song, The River of Babylon. I know Preeti sings very well. Preeti, it will be great if you could just sing 2-3 lines of that song. I know you would know it very well. So these are all by the rivers of Babylon. What is it about? It is also something which is trying to speak about the loss of your homeland, about talking about the loss, the identity, the displacement, and things of that stuff. So we have biblical evidence of exile being a prominent thought of human mind. And we also know that how, all the famous writers, for example, Homer is also one of those eminent writers who takes on the theme of exile. We also know that Virgil was so disappointed because he could never go back to his beloved Rome, because he had written one poem which was considered to be very blasphemous. And so it was something which did not meet the standards of decency. So he was also thrown away. So exile is something that we've very often seen. And when we come to the Middle Ages, we see Dante in his beautiful poem, The Divine Comedy. What is it about? And he could also never return to Florence. He could never go back to Florence, how much he loved Florence. But because of this political stance that he took, so the political asylums, and these are all things that we consider it to be very Semitic, we consider it to be very modern. But the point is that, the point is that exile is something which has existed for a very, very long time. But today, we have the power to speak about it. Exile is a human experience which has existed for a very, very long time. So that is why Shakespeare was also happy discussing the theme of banishment. Now, when we come to Shakespeare, he's not using exile as a term. So what was this exile? Exile at that point of time was some kind of a banishment, and it was more punishment. You wanted to punish somebody. Not that it is not a punishment today, but then this punishment is a very dignified, and it has taken a different term. Exile today has acquired many, many different layers of meaning, but exile is, some kind of a punishment. So you have Sophocles, Oedipus. We see him exiled. We see him banished because he has to be punished for the wrong that he has done. So when we come to as we advance, so Shelley, for example, also is an interesting example that how he was such a radical and he also needed to be exiled, right? So there are so many of such interesting layers of the term exile in writers which were there. We have scripture speaking about it. We have the classical writers talking about it. We have Shakespeare speak about it. And then when we come to the 20th century, there is this whole galaxy of great writers, whether they are Russian, they are Czechoslovakian, then Indian diaspora, and how they also speak, and the African rootlessness. These are all brilliant examples of exile literature. And I am on the side of Senyavel, where I would also not like to talk only about the traumatized selves. Let us also look at the other side of this diasporic prosperity that might have happened because you have also traveled from one land to the other. I would also, again, I love to narrate stories, and I would like to end by again quoting a very beautiful novel. I'm a great fan of Edward, and this particular novel that I want to speak today about is called Hegseed. Now, Hegseed by Edward is a very, very interesting take on Shakespeare's Tempest. So, the novel, you have a theatre director, and his name is Felix. He's lost his job as a director with a theatre company, and now he has been trusted with a job to teach people. Now, the betrayal of Felix happens through his own colleague, and the only thing that can be done for him is to give him a teaching assignment. I do not know if teachers are so easy to, just give anything. You can teach anyone anything. I do not know. So he's asked to teach. The novel centers around this theatre director, Felix, and he's lost his job as a theatre director with a very eminent theatre group. It's called Makeshwick, and now he's been betrayed by his friend, by his very close colleague, and he's exiled into the society. But then he's given this job that, okay, you can teach these people. And the critics, when they look at this kind of a narration of Shakespeare's Tempest, where Felix is heartbroken as an artistic director of this very theatre, and he's supposed to perform the Tempest. He's supposed to perform the Tempest, and he knows that he cannot do it alone. And his cunning colleague is his greatest enemy. And he lands up with this job of teaching literacy to and this actually is a correctional school where he's asked to teach, and there are these players. So the character of Caliban is now doing the correctional work, and they have to take part in this kind of an oh, thank you so much, Urmila. So his daughter, we all know that Miranda is the daughter that Shakespeare mentions, but in this particular Edward novel, the daughter is dead. And when Felix wants to make this presentation to this correctional school, he wants the daughter to come, but the daughter has to appear as a ghost. So the entire situation, is very different, and it is very enlightening. There's this insight that Edward is trying to give through this particular retake, reimagining, reinventing of Shakespeare's The Tempest. So when we thank you, Dr. Rupert. So you just look at all these writers these days, and our own Indian diaspora, how they talk about exile. That small poem that we've all read of Archana Sardana's Exile. So these are all things that really we need to look and feel and understand how exile has got so many different layers, and something that we consider to be some very modernistic, very futuristic, in fact, has existed in the works of innumerable writers from antiquity. And I would say that it is a part of human existence and human exercise for a very, very long while. So thank you. I know it's a Friday evening, and we would like to do other things as well. So thank you, Dr. Preeti. Every time, any dialogue or with Preeti, for me, is a learning exercise, and I up my learning curve. It could be professional, it could be personal. I would have, every time I converse with her, there is something that I take away from that conversation. Not always academic. Sometimes it could be witty life lesson that she would have taught me. Sometimes it could be a great academic input that I have got from her. So thank you, Preeti, for being so generous. It was a sheer delight and my absolute honor to be with you this evening. I also have a great friend in the department, Dr. Sandhya. My friendship with her also goes, yeah, long back.
Thank you,
So,
Archana. Very long way our friendship goes. May
yes,
our friendship stay strong forever. Thank you so much.
and so nice to see you here. And also, my new acquaintance with Urmila is also very delightful for me. So it's nice to see her as well. Thank you, Preeti. Thank you, the Department of English. It was very, very fascinating for me to be here, and absolute and pure delight to be with all of you this evening. Thank you so much. I'm signing off with this. Thank you very much.